This is LSAT Prep Test 152, Section 3, Passage 1, about the Indus Valley Civilization. It is a combination about both science and history, fairly low difficulty. The structure is straightforward and the author's opinion is pretty clear. But students lose points here because they stop paying attention to how confident the author sounds at different moments, and that's what's going to cost you. Now, this passage is making a case that the Indus Valley Civilization was more advanced than scholars gave it credit for. And the old explanation for its collapse is wrong. The author has a replacement theory, but holds it fairly loosely. And that gap between Wheeler is wrong and here's probably what happened is where the hardest questions are. Now, paragraph 4 is the most important paragraph. That's where the old theory gets destroyed and the new one gets proposed. And we're going to get there, but the earlier paragraphs set traps also. Now, paragraph 1 does two things. The first half is background. Indus Valley, Egypt, Sumer, the three big Bronze Age civilizations. The Indus Valley was the biggest geographically, spread across modern-day Pakistan, Afghanistan, and northwestern India. That's fine, you can move through that quickly. But then comes a but. Scholars used to dismiss this civilization because there were no palaces or citadels. Nothing impressive on the surface. Now, recent excavations have flipped that. Now we know the civilization had characteristics without parallel in history. And that phrase matters. The author isn't saying pretty cool, the author is saying unlike anything else. And if you blow past that, you're going to underestimate how strongly the author feels about this civilization's significance. Now, paragraph 2 is a big stack of evidence. Brig cities on flood-proof terraces, straight grid streets, the first urban sewer systems ever built. No signs of dominant rulers, no class divisions in the housing, no weapons. The author here is painting a picture of a civilization that was advanced, democratic, and peaceful. Now, you don't need to memorize every detail here, just know what they're proving. And notice what is missing from this list. No kings, no armies. That is unusual for an ancient civilization, and the author wants you to feel how unusual it is. Now, read this at a steady clip, don't linger on this. Then paragraph 3 shifts to agriculture and trade. The first civilization to cultivate rice and cotton, organized food distribution, major traders with roots across the Arabian Sea and connections to Mesopotamia. Same job here as paragraph 2. More evidence that this civilization deserves respect. You want to skim it. If a question sends you back here, you'll find the detail, but on the first read, you've just got to know it's more support. Now, slow way down for paragraph 4 because that's where the passage earns the questions. The author opens with a signal you can't miss. The causes of the decline are not certain. There is argument among scholars, and so we're entering a debate. Then you meet Mortimer Wheeler, a British archaeologist in the 1920s. His theory is that Indo-Aryan invaders rolled in and massacred everybody. And then the author tells you this theory is still in history books today, and that detail matters. It's telling you the old view has staying power and people still believe it. But then the author dismantles it. There are no written records of any invasion. There is no evidence of battles inside the cities, and the real kill shot is that new excavations show the Indo-Aryans weren't even in the region when the supposed massacre happened. And that's not saying, well, maybe Wheeler overstated things. That's saying Wheeler's theory has zero support. That is aggressive. And then the author pivots to an alternative explanation of environmental collapse. The empire might have broken apart, droughts may have killed the farmland, an earthquake may have rerouted the rivers. But listen to the language here. They say may have, most likely, would probably. Every sentence in the alternative theory is hedged. The author is guessing, not arguing forcefully. So here's the key move. The author's confidence level changes completely between tearing down Wheeler and building up the environmental theory. Wheeler gets demolished with hard evidence, and the replacement theory gets offered with soft language. If you treat them the same way, you're going to get the attitude questions wrong. Now, the main trap here is picking an answer that's too strong about the environmental explanation. Students remember drought and earthquakes, and those feel concrete, so they pick answers that make it sound like the author proved what caused the decline, but the author didn't. The author only proved what didn't cause it. And that's a big difference, and the questions are going to exploit that. Now, before you get to the questions, you want to check yourself on three things. First, what is the author's attitude toward the old scholarly view that the Indus Valley was boring? Second, why does the author spend so much time listing achievements in paragraphs 2 and 3 before getting to the decline? And third, can you tell the difference between how the author talks about Wheeler's theory versus the environmental explanation? If you've got those three, you're going to be good. So that was passage 1. Now we're going on to prep test 152, section 3, passage 2. This is a humanities passage about whether Hollywood musicals break a film scholar's definition of classical filmmaking. This is a medium difficulty passage. The ideas here are not complicated, but paragraph 3 changes midstream, and if you don't catch the turn, you're going to answer 2 or 3 questions from the wrong perspective. Now, this is a takedown passage. The author puts someone else's theory on the table, pokes a hole in it, and then shows that the scholar's own patch job still leaks. Now, the most important paragraph is paragraph 3. That is where the fight happens. Paragraphs 1 and 2 are just loading the gun. So if you gave all 3 paragraphs equal attention, you spent too long on the setup. Now, paragraph 1 lays out Bordwell's definition of classical Hollywood style. Now, the core idea here is simple. Everything in a classical film serves the story. Camera, lighting, editing, sound, all of it works to make you forget you're watching a movie. The world on screen is supposed to feel real and self-contained. Anything that reminds you there's a camera there gets avoided. Now, you want to read this at normal speed. Don't memorize the examples, just lock in the definition. Story first, filmmaking invisible. Then paragraph 2 is the challenge round. The author says musicals don't fit that definition. And then Berkeley shows up as the proof. A scene starts with somebody singing, fine. But then the image dissolves into these wide, wild aerial shots and abstract visual patterns that have zero to do with the plot. Now, the camera work in those moments is not serving the story. It's doing its own thing. The filmmaking isn't hiding anymore. It's the whole point. So the author asks the question you should already be asking. Can musicals really belong inside Bordwell's box? You can move through the Berkeley details quickly because they're evidence, not argument. The question at the end of the paragraph is what you're carrying into paragraph 3. Now, paragraph 3 is where you want to slow down. That's where most students get it wrong. It opens with Bordwell's defense. He says musicals evolved from live theater. Audiences already knew the deal. You watch a story, then a performance interrupts it, and then the story comes back. Because viewers expected that pattern, it didn't feel strange. It counted as realistic. And that sounds like a pretty solid answer. And that is exactly the problem. Because if you buy it, you're going to miss the author pulling the rug out in the second half of the paragraph. Watch for the word but halfway through. Because everything before it is Bordwell talking. Everything after it is the author saying no. Now, the author's counter has 2 layers. First, these musical numbers aren't just neat little breaks from the plot. They are self-absorbed. And that word there is doing heavy lifting. The author is saying the performances don't just pause the story, they hijack your attention. They want you to admire the filmmaking. And that's the exact thing Bordwell's own definition says classical Hollywood doesn't do. So the genre defense circles right back into the original problem. Now, the second layer, even if you know you're watching a musical, you still feel the break. The author says watching a film is a perceptual act, meaning it's something that happens to you in real time. You can't just think your way past it because you know what genre you're in. That is the author calling Bordwell's approach too academic. It's too detached from what actually happens when someone sits in a theater. Now, the last 2 sentences are the author's prescription. Bordwell should have started by studying how viewers actually process images on screen before making big claims about realism. That is the author's final position. You skipped a step. Now, the key move here that you should know is that paragraph 3 splits in half. The first half is Bordwell's best defense. The second half dismantles it. Now, if you read that paragraph as one continuous argument going in one direction, you would have gotten the author's stance wrong. The turn happens at the word but, so you want to find that. Now, the main trap is thinking Bordwell won the argument, but he didn't. He got a rebuttal, and the author rejected it. If a question asks about the author's attitude toward Bordwell's response, the answer is going to be critical. Wrong answers are going to make it sound like the author accepted the genre explanation or found it mostly convincing. Now, you should also watch for a question about that word self-absorbed. The passage draws a clear line between self-contained and self-absorbed, and that distinction is important doing real structural work. Self-contained means the performance is just its own thing, separate from the plot. Self-absorbed means it's actively pulling attention toward itself. The author uses the second one to show the problem is worse than Bordwell admits. Now, before you hit the questions, you want to check yourself on three things. First, why doesn't the genre argument actually fix the problem with Bordwell's definition? Second, what is the author saying when they call film watching a perceptual act? And third, what does the author think Bordwell should have done differently from the start? So that was passage 2. And for those wondering, I'm doing my regular live Q&A live stream in about 1 hour at 2 Eastern, 1 Central, 11 Pacific. That'll be an open Q&A. Anything LSAT and law school admissions. Right now I'm doing LSAT reading comp explanations for every single reading comp passage ever. We're working through them bit by bit together. This is LSAT PrepTest 152, Section 3, Passage 3. This is a comparative or dual passage set about free will, blame, and the criminal justice system. It's medium difficulty, and what makes it tricky is that both authors agree on the science. So if you're looking for a factual disagreement, you're not going to find one. The split here is entirely about what to do next. And that is exactly where students pick the wrong answers. Now, this is a shared premise, different conclusion structure. Both authors start from the same place, that free will is mostly or entirely an illusion. Passage A says that means we have to tear blame out of the legal system. Passage B says we can't, and maybe we shouldn't even try. Now, before we walk through each passage, you should know this. The most important moment in the entire pair is the last paragraph of passage B. That is where the real disagreement crystallizes, and everything else is building toward it. Now, passage A, paragraph 1, gives you the assumption behind the legal system. People freely choose how to act, then it immediately attacks that assumption. Neuroscience shows the brain is fully interconnected. No part operates on its own. So there is nowhere to locate a free choice. This paragraph is set up so you want to read it at a normal speed. Don't linger on the neuroscience details here. You've just got to understand the author is pulling the rug out from under the legal system's foundation. Then paragraph 2 of passage A goes even further. If free will does exist, it's tiny. It's sitting on top of a massive pile of genetics and environment and neural wiring. Then the author compares bad decisions to a physical affliction. You want to slow down on that comparison, because it tells you everything about where this author stands. If bad choices are like symptoms of a disease, then punishing people for them makes no sense. That is the logic driving the whole passage. Now, the last paragraph of passage A is the payoff. The author says to drop blameworthiness entirely, calls it backward looking. Now, that phrase is doing heavy lifting. It means the author wants a legal system that asks one question. How is this person likely to behave in the future? Not what did they do, not why did they do it, just what comes next. You want to read this paragraph slowly because that is the position the questions will test you on later. Now, passage B. It opens with a question. If people don't have free will, how will you get the law to stop blaming them? The answer is basically you don't. Not because the science is wrong, but because human psychology won't let go of blame. And that opening paragraph sets up everything that follows. Now, the next section of passage B gives you the evidence. People keep making moral judgments even when they're told behavior is biologically determined. So the blaming urge is deep. The author straight up says they doubt any amount of scientific evidence can remove it from the justice system. Now, you don't want to gloss over that because that's one of the strongest claims in either passage. And then you get a historical example. Rehabilitation was popular in the mid-20th century. Then it collapsed. Public opinion swung back toward punishment in the 70s and 80s. This paragraph exists to prove one thing. We already tried this, it failed, so you want to speed through the specifics here. The dates and timeline are not important. They're not what the questions are going to ask you about. The point is the pattern. Then the last paragraph of passage B. And this is the one that matters most. The author says blame serves a real social function, even if it's based on something false. It is too deeply woven into human social life to just cut away. And so instead of removing blame, the system should understand why people need it and respect that need. This is a fundamentally different move from passage A. Passage A says, the system is broken, so rebuild it. Passage B says, the system reflects something real about people, so you want to work with that. Now here's where you need to spend your attention. The relationship between these two passages. They agree on the facts, free will is shaky, biology drives behavior more than we think, the legal system's assumptions don't match the science. So if a question asks you whether passage B defends free will, the answer is no. Passage B never even claims free will exists, and that is the biggest trap in this set. Now, where they split is on what follows from those facts. Passage A draws a straight line. No free will means no blame, means rebuild the system around future behavior. It is clean and logical. Passage B says that logic doesn't matter because people can't stop blaming. The evidence is there, but human nature won't cooperate. So passage B isn't disagreeing with the argument, it's saying the argument is irrelevant to how the real world works. Now there is one more layer. Passage A treats blame as purely a mistake, a bad concept that should be thrown out. Passage B treats blame as something that serves a purpose. Even a false belief can meet a real need. Now that is not just a disagreement about strategy, it is a disagreement about what blame actually is. Passage A says it's an error. Passage B says it's a feature of human social life that happens to rest on an error. Now you want to watch for choices that say passage B rejects the scientific evidence, because it doesn't. It accepts the evidence completely. What it rejects is the idea that evidence alone can change how people behave. And that distinction is where the questions are going to try to catch you. Now the key move here is that both passages accept the same science but reach opposite conclusions because they're asking different questions. Passage A asks what the legal system should do. Passage B asks what it can actually do. So every hard question in this set is built on that gap. Now, before you hit the questions, check yourself on three things. First, can you explain what passage A means by backward looking? Second, can you say why passage B brings up the failure of rehabilitation? And most importantly, can you name the one thing these two authors actually disagree about without saying it's the science? So that was passage 3. We're going to move on now to passage 4. We're here. This is LSAT PrepTest 152, section 3, passage 4. It is a cosmology passage about the Big Bang, entropy, and the multiverse. It is medium difficulty, and the science might sound scary, but don't let it fool you. The structure here is straightforward. The trick is that the science makes you read slowly when you should be reading for structure. Now, this is an explanation passage. It sets up a mystery, then gives you one team's answer. Carroll and Shen think the Big Bang was not a one-off miracle. It was a natural, repeatable event inside a much bigger multiverse, and that is the main point. Everything in this passage either builds up to that claim or supports it. Now, the most important paragraph is paragraph 4. That's when Carroll and Shen actually make their move. If you skim it, you're going to misunderstand their whole argument, but I'm going to come back to that. Paragraph 1 is background you probably already know. The universe started tiny, hot, and dense. Inflation happened. Things expanded and cooled. There is zero argument here. The passage is just getting you oriented. You want to read it once and keep moving. Don't let it eat up your time. Then paragraph 2 drops in Carroll and Shen. Their big claim lands right away. The Big Bang wasn't unique. It happens repeatedly across an enormous timescale. And our universe is not the whole show. It's sitting inside a larger structure, a multiverse. The passage uses the phrase cosmic bubble to describe our universe. And that is a great image to hold on to. We're one bubble in a much bigger thing. Now, the move this paragraph makes is a scale shift. You go from thinking about our universe to thinking about something way larger. And if you miss that shift, the rest of the passage is not going to track. Now, paragraph 3 is long. It looks important, but it's not, at least not in the way you'd expect. This whole paragraph is a science lesson about entropy. Entropy means disorder. The second law of thermodynamics says disorder increases over time, because there are more ways for things to be messy than to be neat. The passage gives you a room analogy. If you move stuff around randomly, the room gets messier, not tidier. That's the whole idea. Now, you don't need the details of that analogy, you just need to have the principle. Systems naturally drift toward disorder. So you want to treat this paragraph like a textbook page the author stuck in to make sure you're ready for what comes next. You want to read for the concept here and skip the math. Now for paragraph 4, you want to slow way down because here is the mystery. If things naturally become more disordered, then the universe should have started in a high entropy state, with everything spread out, cold, and random. But it didn't. It started in a low entropy state, which was hot and dense and incredibly ordered. So that doesn't match what you would expect. And here's where Carroll and Shen do something clever. They flip it around. They say the most common initial condition actually looks like cold, empty space, not some perfectly arranged, hot, dense point. And so the Big Bang didn't need a special setup. It came from the most ordinary starting point imaginable. And that flip is the entire passage. If you miss it, you're going to think Carroll and Shen are saying the Big Bang was some weird exception, but they're arguing the exact opposite. Then paragraph 5 gives you the mechanism. Recent research has shown empty space has tiny energy fluctuations at the subatomic level. Two other physicists, Garriga and Vilenkin, proposed that these fluctuations can spark their own Big Bangs in tiny pockets. Carroll and Shen take that idea and apply it. They say our universe is one of those fluctuations popping up inside a high entropy multiverse. So this paragraph answers the how question. It's supporting evidence. You want to read it carefully enough to get the mechanism, but you don't want to memorize the names. Then paragraph 6 is the landing. If you look at it alone, our universe seems wildly improbable. But inside the multiverse, it's not improbable at all. And that last line is supposed to hit you hard, saying our universe probably is not even a unique event. That is Carroll and Shen's whole point in one sentence. So the passage ends where it wants you to end up. Now the key move here is in paragraph 4. The standard expectation says a random starting point should be disordered. Carroll and Shen say yes, and that disordered starting point is exactly what produces a Big Bang through fluctuations. They turned the mystery into the explanation. And the test writers are going to build the hardest questions around whether you caught that reversal. Now there is a pattern running through this passage that's worth naming. It is a zoom out. Paragraph 1 gives you our universe. Paragraph 2 pulls back to the multiverse. Paragraph 3 gives you the physics. Paragraph 4 reframes the problem. Paragraphs 5 and 6 put it all together at the largest scale. Every step widens the lens. If you feel the passage getting bigger as you read, you're tracking it right. Now the author presents Carroll and Shen's view favorably. There is no pushback anywhere, no competing theory, no some critics say. The author is walking you through this explanation because they find it convincing. The trap is thinking this passage is about how mysterious the Big Bang is, but it's not. It's about how the Big Bang stops being mysterious once you zoom out far enough. If you pick an answer that treats the Big Bang as a deep, unsolved puzzle, you've fallen for what paragraph 3 set up before paragraph 4 knocked it down. Now, before you hit the questions, you want to make sure you can answer these 3 things. First, what is the difference between what you'd expect from a random starting point and what our universe actually looked like? Second, why does Carroll and Shen's argument need the multiverse? What problem does the multiverse solve for them? And third, why does the passage spend all of paragraph 3 on entropy before the real argument even starts? So that was test 152. We're going to go on now to test 150. This is test 150, section 1. We're going to start with passage 1. Okay, this is PrepTest 150, section 1, passage 1, about greenhouse effect and global warming. And this one is a science passage. It reads easier than it actually is. The danger is you finish it thinking both sides have a point, but they don't. The author picked a side right from the start. The difficulty level, therefore, is low. The author is defending the greenhouse theory, and that's it. Every paragraph either builds the case or knocks down a competing explanation. And if you see that going in, the questions are going to be straightforward. Now, the paragraph you've got to spend the most time on is paragraph 2. That is where the author takes the best shot anyone has against the greenhouse theory and dismantles it. Now, if you skim that paragraph, you're going to be guessing on at least 2 questions. Now, paragraph 1 is the setup. You're going to move through it at a normal speed. You get 2 things here. 1, the Earth has warmed about a half a degree Celsius over the last 100 years, and that is unprecedented going back 1,000 years. 2, recent studies have connected that warming to the greenhouse effect. Certain gases trap heat. That is the claim on the table. Nothing sneaky yet, all just groundwork. Now, paragraph 2 is the heart of this passage. It opens with what looks like bad news for the greenhouse theory. Early models overestimated how much warming should have happened. The predicted numbers didn't match reality, and that gave opponents a reason to push back. Now, if you're reading fast, you might think the passage is about to walk away from the greenhouse theory, but it's not. Watch for the word "but" right in the middle of the paragraph. Everything before that word is the problem. Everything after it is the fix. New methods accounted for something the old models missed: airborne sulfates. Those come from volcanoes and from human sources. They bounce solar energy back into space. So they were cooling things down and masking part of the warming. But once scientists plugged sulfates into the models using data from glacial ice, the numbers lined up. Now, you want to slow way down here. This is the move that saves the whole theory, and if you miss it, you'll think the passage is more uncertain than it actually is. Now, paragraph 3 introduces a second challenge. Some scientists say solar energy variations explain the temperature changes, and the passage is pretty generous to this view. Solar models do match temperature patterns decades by decade, and that part sounds convincing, but the author pulls it apart at the end. Solar variation cannot account for the full size of the current rise. The passage just talks about equilibrium temperature. That is just the baseline the atmosphere keeps returning to after short-term swings. The current warming goes beyond what solar models can explain. So the passage closes by saying greenhouse gases are the best explanation for the shift. They're not one explanation among several, they are the best one. Now, the key move here is the rescue pattern. The author raises 2 real threats to the greenhouse theory and beats both of them. The model problem gets solved by sulfates. Solar variation gets credit but is shown to be incomplete. Each challenge actually makes the greenhouse case stronger because the theory survives both. Now, here is where most students go wrong. They read this as a scientists disagree passage, but it's not. The author is not on the fence here. The 2 challenges aren't open questions sitting there unresolved. They have been answered already. So if you walk out of here thinking, well, it could be greenhouse gases or it could be the sun, you have missed the whole point. And that mistake's going to cost you on main point and author's attitude questions. Now, before you hit the questions, you want to check yourself on 3 things. First, what exactly fixed the early greenhouse models and why did it matter? Second, what can the solar theory explain and where does it fall short? And third, can you point to the exact moment in paragraph 2 where the passage stops raising doubts and starts defending the theory? So that was passage 1. We're going to go on now to passage 2. This is LSAT PrepTest 150, section 1, passage 2, about police interview techniques for eyewitnesses. It's medium difficulty, and the passage reads easy, which is actually the danger here, because it feels like a neutral comparison of 3 methods, but it's not. The author is working by elimination, and there's only one winner at the end. Now, this is a science passage. The author is evaluating 3 ways to interview witnesses and pick a side. The main point is instructed eye closure gives you the benefits of the cognitive interview without any of the baggage. Now, the most important paragraph is the last one. That is where the author reveals the move they've been setting up since paragraph 2, but we want to track first how they got there. Paragraph 1 is the setup. Police want more information from eyewitnesses. The cognitive interview exists, that's it. Don't spend any extra mental energy here. The only thing to take away is that the cognitive interview is the baseline, the thing every other method gets compared to. Read it and move on. Paragraph 2 is where the real game starts, and it runs a bait and switch on you. The first half makes the cognitive interview sound solid. It increases the number of details witnesses remember. Doesn't add any more wrong answers. So far, so good. Then the author drops the word however, and everything flips. The method is complex, the training takes forever, officers skip the training or get it and still do it wrong. Notice what the author is not saying here. They're not saying the cognitive interview fails. They're saying it's too hard to pull off in practice, and that is a very specific criticism. The method works in theory but falls apart in the real world. So if a question asks about the author's attitude toward the cognitive interview, don't pick an answer saying it's ineffective. Pick the one that says it is impractical. Those are two different things, and the test is going to offer you both choices. Then paragraph 3 brings in hypnosis and the author destroys it. And this one doesn't even get the partial credit the cognitive interview got. Accuracy doesn't improve. Sometimes it gets worse. And there's the false confidence problem. Witnesses become more sure of themselves even when they're wrong. That is a detail worth flagging because it's the kind of thing that shows up in a specific question. The author also points out that not everyone responds to hypnosis, which is a practical problem on top of the accuracy problem. So the cognitive interview works, but is too complicated. Hypnosis is both ineffective and impractical. The author is stacking the failures in order, and each method gets a worse report. That is not an accident here. That's the process of elimination. Then paragraph 4, you want to slow way down. The author opens with a wish list. The ideal method would need no special training. It would work on all witnesses. It would improve memory. It would not increase errors. Now you want to read that list again. Every single item is a problem that showed up in paragraphs 2 or 3. No special training, that is the cognitive interview's weakness. Works on all witnesses, that is hypnosis's weakness. Improves memory without adding errors, that is what hypnosis failed to do. The author built this checklist out of the wreckage of the first 2 methods. Then eye closure walks in and checks every box. Works for visual and auditory memory. Works for video and live events. No dropout problem. And right at the end, the part you really need to catch, the author says eye closure produces results equivalent to the cognitive interview. Same quality with none of the cost. Now the word equivalent here is doing enormous work. It lets the author say, you get the same output with a fraction of the input. Now the key move is the wish list at the top of paragraph 4. The author doesn't just describe what eye closure can do. They first define what a perfect method would look like, using the exact weaknesses of the other 2 methods as the criteria. Then eye closure meets every single one. That is how the argument lands. Now the author clearly favors eye closure. The big trap is treating this as a neutral overview. Students who treat all 3 methods equally will miss the main point. The passage has a direction. Paragraphs 2 and 3 don't just describe the cognitive interview and hypnosis, they disqualify them. The whole passage works like a funnel, narrowing down to one answer. And if you miss the funnel, you're going to treat the conclusion as just another data point instead of the destination. Now, before you hit the questions, you want to check yourself on these 3 things. First, what is the difference between why the author rejects the cognitive interview and why they reject hypnosis? Those are not the same criticism. Then second, why does the author bring up false confidence specifically? What kind of question could that detail anchor? And third, can you explain why the opening of paragraph 4 isn't just a throwaway intro, why it's actually the most strategic moment in the passage? So folks, I'm going to leave off here, but I'll be back in about 45 minutes, 2 p.m. Eastern, 1 Central, 11 Pacific, for the regular daily live Q&A on anything at all, LSAT and law school admissions. I'll see you all then.